Okay, Cliff and Marta Wilde, thank you so very much for joining me on the Quantum Creating podcast. And can I say I'm absolutely thrilled to have the pair of you pop in my couple's cherry live on the Quantum Creating podcast. So thanks very much for that.
Well, thanks for having us. It feels like an honour both ways, I guess.
Yeah,
clearly.
And it's a long time coming. As you know, Cliff, I've known you for quite some time, and I followed your stuff for a long while, and I'm really interested in your backstories actually as to how you got here. So it's been a long journey, that I know. Give us some background on yourselves and how you managed to get where you are today.
Well, I will give you the 1.5 version of the story, because otherwise we'll be here for 14 years maybe.
And you could as well, right? You could really do that, yeah.
Oh yeah, easy.
Yeah, between my ability to talk a lot and also the ability to tell that story, I suppose. Long story short, I was born with a 64 degrees curve of my spine, which resulted in 3 major operations before the age of 3 years of age.
Wow.
Long story short, back then, 30 odd years ago, they didn't have the ability to kind of straighten spines and all that kind of stuff that they do now. And so I ended up with a double fusion of my spine, my thoracic spine, my middle spine, which essentially meant I've got a 64 degrees curve in my spine and lost about 6 inches of height.
Right.
Then when I was 15, so I had quite a lot of pain when I was a kid, growing pains, all that kind of stuff, and the spine issues. Then when I was 15, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis.
Okay.
That was a bit of a pain in the ass, pardon the pun.
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
That was horrible. We can go more into that, but it's horrible illness. I don't wish it on anyone. And then when I was 17, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And then 18, I had meningitis of the brain. And then after that, I had several different parasites, infections, all sorts of different good stuff. So yeah, that's the fast forward of it. I suppose the news of it is I've been 10 years symptom free of all of that stuff. So that's the better side.
And that's the whole point, really, I guess, why you do what you do now, right? So you're able to share. And same for me, really. So we are able to share different perspective on things that very often are classified as impossible to resolve or very challenging to resolve, or you'd submitted basically to live your life with impairments and issues that I don't want to sound blasé, but in our world, in our understanding, if someone's committed to change and wants to have a different outcome, they're easy to resolve. But there has to be that awareness, and there has to be that opportunity for people to hear a different information. And, Cliff's journey, health-related journey, was really physical. And when we first met in 2009, and we went on our first unofficial date together, that I still keep saying on every podcast, every interview, I keep teasing Cliff that he insists it wasn't a date. I always say it was a date. When he told me that story, I literally just went silent, and he said, okay, well, do you want to tell me more about yourself? And I thought, holy shit, I haven't got much to say. Right. But when I actually did start talking and shared my story, his response was very similar, saying, I can't believe that you're not talking more about it and sharing more with the world and letting people hear that you did this and you were able to do it. And, growing up in Poland, when I was first born in the 80s, we were still under the communist regime, and life was very different to what it is right now. And, I grew up with a perception of myself of being a lesser human because I'm from Eastern Europe. And I didn't even realize that until I actually moved to the UK, met Cliff a few years later, and I realized that he was interested in me, wanted to see me, wanted to date me. And I was thinking, why would an English dude want to date a Eastern European Polish girl? Now, talking to you about this, it seems silly and funny, but it's fascinating how many clients from a similar background had exactly the same stories. So it's incredible that I'm able to share how now I see it as a gift and a transformation that I've gone through stemmed from me growing up in that regime and seeing the restrictions and limitations of it. And I was able to turn it into a gift. My dad was drinking loads when I was a kid. My mom wasn't really overly open in terms of talking and sharing emotions and things like that. So my brother's 13 years older. I've always felt really lonely and alone and kind of on my own, which at the same time allowed me to make loads of decisions just for myself from very early on and in life. But at the same time, as a kid, I always craved that support of somebody else. I guess that's probably why I'm so good at supporting others right now. And through
I think
the thick and thin of my life, go on.
I was going to say you a couple of times you used the word gift, and I think that's spot on. I think that's so true. We all go through a journey. We all go through our stories. Some perceptions, they can be worse than others, but fundamentally to share that journey is a gift, because it enables people to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. It enables people to understand that they can actually change their lives in a considerable way, and you help so many people do that from so many different walks of life. It's just incredible.
It feels incredible, and it's a beautiful thing that we actually can very boldly say that right now, how humbled and happy we are to be able to help these guys, because with Cliff's history being a lot more physical and medically driven, for me going into depression and panic attacks, that certain aspects of that more psychological journey were driven by physical infections and physiological issues with my body, but there was a lot of emotional healing that went on for me, and understanding my emotion from the very, neuroscientific perspective of how our brains work, to how our bodies work, to then the more spiritual aspect of our energy, of a higher purpose, of understanding that there's something greater than us as well. And that personal evolution of mine has led me to the point where I am right now, where together with Cliff, we're able to create such a powerful method and a combination of everything we bring together that are enabling people to turn their lives around, whether it is, again, looking at the physical health, their emotions, whatever it might be. It's looking at the totality of someone's life rather than just individual parts, and bringing everything together that makes it so powerful and so successful as well at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know from speaking to Cliff separately that, when he went through his journey, he maybe not felt let down, maybe that's a strong word, but didn't get the support that he thought he could get from the current paradigm medical profession, if you were. Did you find the same, Marta? Were you struggling to get resolution on your issues? Did you find any help, or was it something you had to look at yourself?
Very much myself, to a certain degree, in terms of looking for answers. What happened in 2008, I was working in corporate recruitment. That was before I chose to requalify and go into the fitness industry as a personal trainer originally, and that's where I met Cliff. So in 2008, while still working in the corporate area, in recruitment, I got to a point where I was just exhausted to the level where I lived in central London, worked just across Covent Garden on the Strand. Beautiful 15-minute walk. I physically couldn't walk from work back home in the afternoon at 5 or 6 o'clock, just because I was so exhausted. So I was living on Lucozade and coffees and things like that. And I kept searching for answers. And every time I went to my GP and insisted on testing and asking what's going on with me, I was just met with a blank face. And I did eventually get my way, asking for all the tests that she could possibly run on me when there was no answers. And I kept searching for different things that could possibly be going on with me. Bringing articles, bringing studies. I was basically told she didn't have the time to read them, and eventually that I had to stop questioning her medical expertise. And all she had to offer for me was, oh, maybe you drink too much. Well, I said to her, I haven't got the energy to physically go out for a drink with my friends over the weekend. And, initially I was very angry. I was very frustrated with the lack of resources, lack of help, lack of support, and lack of information. But when you really dive a little bit deeper into the health system and conventional approach right now, very often there's just no resources, no time, no funding, no ability ability to explore any further than a Google checklist or a, tick list for a certain condition, or, the length of appointments with your GPs or doctors is, what's the statistics on a cliff actually knows the numbers, how much shorter they are now than a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, they used to be on average 18 minutes and now they're down to roughly 7, just purely because of the biggest change in it is when they introduced electronic records.
Right.
So like they thought that bringing electronic records in was to help keep a better patient history, but it wasn't. The original reason was for insurance companies to make sure that things were being defrauded and could be tracked better.
Okay.
So that was why it originally came in.
So, there is, you have to, I believe that you have to look at it from both perspectives.
Yeah.
When Cliff had a brain tumor, he wouldn't have gone to someone like us to seek help, right? He needed conventional medicine approach to save his life. Yeah. And that's amazing. That's available to us. But when we're looking at people's lifestyles, unexplained symptoms, collective of physiology and emotions, very often conventional medicine isn't the best approach for them because it simply doesn't look at the totality of us as a human being, the life, the environment that we live in, the relationships that we're in, what it is that we're doing with ourselves in our lives and how that's affecting the place we're in. So it's knowing where you are in life, what answers you're looking for, and then taking responsibility for who you're going to go to, asking for assistance in finding answers and supporting.
Do you find then that clients come to you when they've not been able to find any answers or really have got no resolution whatsoever and are looking for that elusive answer that they can't get anywhere else?
A lot of the time, there's a yes to that answer, but they're not necessarily a complete breaking point. Like actually, I'm speaking to a lady after this recording actually, who was at that point, she'd been in conventional medical system for like 15 years, autoimmune disease, no answers, ended up on a myriad of different drugs and all sorts. And so that she is a case like that. But on the other side, some people just know there's more inside of them. Like, I'll give you an example. We've got who's an elite cyclist who just won the time trial national championships in Australia today. And, that person is not someone who's sick and dying or in despair, but they had a feeling that the way mentally and physically they were performing was inhibiting their professional career. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense.
So there's two sides of that coin for sure.
So there's the high performance side and there's the wellness side, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and they kind of co-join, but I think the thing that brings all of our clients together is they kind of have this pull from the inside out that they know there's a different way. They have maybe no idea what it might be, what it might entail, or what they actually need, but they just feel it. Does that make sense?
Yes. I find this absolutely fascinating because it seems like you're actually trying to do, and I might be wrong here, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm not, is optimal performance, optimal health, optimizing a human being, so to speak. Would that be fair to say? Absolutely.
And the beauty of what we realized over the years we do with our clients is that approach, the multi-dimensional and multifaceted approach, because the tendency is in the wellness, in the self-development, in the health coaching world is that it's still very separate most of the times. People will look at mindset, people will look at spirituality. They'll either lean more towards the more emotional, psychological side, or they will go down the physical and physiological route.
Right.
And you can't separate these two aspects. And whether it is someone who feels like they're at the end of the line, explored so many different avenues. We've had several clients that have gone to the greatest specialists in their respective countries, various doctors, various other therapists, and couldn't get the answers that they were looking for, simply because it was solely focused on the physiology.
Right.
And, they might have got a little bit better, but no one talked to them and dealt with their emotions attached to what they're experiencing on the physical side. And we had clients at the same time that have gone to spiritual healers, that have been to retreats in South America and done all sorts of stuff on that side, but haven't actually looked at their physiology. So whether it is, like I said, someone at the end of the line looking for health answers, or whether it's someone like our cyclist client who's looking to optimize their performance and become a better human on and off the bike, it's the collective of what we do to bring the physiology and the emotions, the psychology all together under one roof and allow someone to see their life from a totally different perspective. And that's what hits the nail on the head and actually gets these people the results that, you know, loads of people say we get people these and those, you know, those results, but we don't really get any results for anyone. We support and we guide. It's the client that chooses to take that responsibility and get those results for themselves. And it is the combination of everything that we do together that brings it about. And even just recently, Cliff and I have been talking about it because we had several, probably 3 to 5 people very quickly, like one after another, for whatever reason, in the same week, get in contact that have worked with us 4 to 5 to even 6 years ago and sharing how amazing their life is and how all the stuff that we did together all those years ago is still so very relevant. And I said to Cliff, you know what, we have to do like an old client testimonial video or something like that, because if you go on people's websites and you read success stories, you read testimonials, I often ask myself how recent and how relevant they are at the moment. But actually, with all those clients getting in touch in that same week, a few weeks ago, I realized that it's actually probably a different question to be asked, that how many of these are actually still living those results that they describe in their success stories. And it was just such an incredible feeling for us to have all these guys reach out at the same time. Obviously a confirmation for us of how awesome it is what we do, to be able to see that we can say that we don't just help people get results here and now, but it is the long term and the longevity of what we do together that stays with them for the rest of their life.
It's a great validation for the work you do. And the word that strikes me about all this is reconnecting. You know, we live in an era where people think they're separate. They think they're separate from each other. They think they're separate from nature. They think they're separate from elements of themselves, their mind, their brain, their body, however that looks. And what it seems that you guys are very, very good at is reconnecting all this, bringing them back into harmony and balance with who they truly are and what they truly can do.
I love the fact that you use the word harmony before balance, because it's something that we talk to our clients about a lot. And it was in fact one of our clients a couple of years ago that said, you know what, the word balance feels like 50-50, and that being in the middle, it's kind of boring because you don't really know where you're going and what's happening. But when you find the harmony that works for you, it's your own personal version of balance. And to be able to do that, you have to experience the disconnection first, because you need to experience the opposite to be able to fully appreciate the reconnection. And like you said, a lot of people find themselves separate or disconnected from each other, from the world around them. And what I always say to the guys that I work with is that our eyes can see, but they can't see themselves. I think I heard it from Jason Silva once in one of his videos, and I was like, this makes so much sense. It's obvious. They can see, but they can't see themselves. So how do we actually see what's within? It's by projecting everything on the world around us. The world, the reality that unravels around us is just a giant projector screen. So if we see that disconnection outside, we get to look inside first and see and ask ourselves that question: where am I disconnected from myself? What parts of me are not working in harmony and unity? And if you think of Luke, who just won the second national championship title when working with us, the sole work we did last season was focused on unifying every single aspect of him as a person. And it was just such a beautiful testament what happened today, that the social aspect of him, the husband, the son, the friend, and the cyclist guy that's so committed to his career all came together on that bike to get the result that he desired. And it doesn't have to be reflected in professional sport. It could be reflected in our family life, how we interacting between each other, Cliff and myself, for example. If we separate and rattling all the different pieces of ourselves internally, we're not going to be the best version of ourselves for the other person. So whatever aspect of our life is important for us at the time, whatever it is our clients are working on with us, we're looking at that unity, that harmony, that balance internally first, and that just reflects on the world, just making everything around us immediately better.
And by telling people this and by educating people about this, you're starting to get them to look at themselves in a completely different way. And that opens the door to all this wonderful healing and all this wonderful transformation and optimization that they can then go on and enjoy.
Well, I feel the biggest thing for us nowadays is, you said, like, we have this overwhelming access to information. You know, there really isn't a lack of information. If anything, we are fed too much of it now. And that leads people to just constant questioning, constant doubting. And in some people, when they've been suffering for quite a long time, like some of the people that come to us, it leads to skepticism, right? Yeah, and rightly so. You know, I was just speaking to a guy who's going to work with us one-to-one today, and he openly said, you know, there's a level of skepticism about the work that you guys do, because, you know, I've been referred to you, it was a strong referral, they've got, you know, amazing results, they praise you and everything, but there's bits of my brain that don't think it's a thing. Does that make sense? And that's, you know, when people start understanding how the brain is wired from a point of view of safety, how we would call it safety anyway, and how we then start validating our patterns through that, it's very easy to see how people get overwhelmed and lost, because it's very easy to do in the modern world nowadays, because everyone, like you said, is so connected but disconnected at the same time. Because, you know, one thing we know, we all, you know, are on social media, I guess, and majority of people listening will be, is that the one thing we know, the more you use social media, the more symptoms of depression you show, right? And the more you get withdrawn within social situations. And that's probably one of the biggest issues for the youngest generations that we face now. Like, they're so in tune with electronics, they're so adapted to electronics, but their brain, their prefrontal cortex, isn't yet developed as that protection mechanism. So what happens is the way it affects them compared to what it affects us as adults is very different. And so therefore, it can cause real issues with trying to get children to be social with each other and to try and get them to be into communities. And it's you know, it's a very long conversation, but I don't think it's that we have to get rid of technology. I just think we have to be a bit smarter with how we use it, maybe.
Yeah, no, I agree. As the father of 4 children who have seen them grow up through the use of technology, it is something that I was going to say is a cause for concern, but does have me trying desperately to have the kids, you know, being more social, working on their conversational skills, working on engaging with people on a face-to-face level rather than just doing it all through social media or through direct messaging or through gaming, which they seem to do today. I'm interested. So I know you do a lot of holistic kind of health related stuff. I'm guessing quite a bit, but how much of that stuff is directed at the gut?
The thing is with it is that when I would look at health, I suppose there's 2 ways to explain it. I'll explain it this way first, and then I'll get back to the question of the gut, I suppose. So in conventional medicine, we are a human organism, right? So a person is a human organism. And so when you have a symptom, you have a pain or you have an issue going on, you'll go to the doctor and complain about that system, right? Or you'll complain about the symptom. And what they will do is they will look at what system that's associated to. So if you've got a pain in your chest, they may look at your heart, right? Your cardiovascular system. Mm-hmm. If you've got weight loss issues, then maybe they might look at your endocrine system, your hormonal system. If you've got gut pain, like IBS issues, then they'll look at your gut. Does that make sense? Your digestive system.
Yeah.
So the problem with this, for me, it's quite backwards. For someone who studied biochemistry to a certain degree, what we want to understand is how this really works. So we as humans, we're trillions of cells, right? Trillions and trillions of cells. And so the cell is the first recognized point of life. So then when we have a collection of cells together, that creates a tissue. So you can think of muscle tissue, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so we have 4 different types of tissue. And then when we get a collection of tissues together, we create an organ. All right. So think of a heart or whatever it might be. And then when we have a collection of organs together, we have a system. Okay. So if we think of the gut, it's part of a system. So when we work with people, there is obviously the symptomology that they have.
Yep.
But any symptomology that anyone has is a dysfunction of the cells. So what we want to do is look at where can we get the biggest bang for our buck in making our changes, right? So the gut is a powerhouse. Yep. You know, obviously my journey started with the gut because, you know, now being 10 years symptom med free of ulcerative colitis, I kind of had to learn about it, right? So with the gut, you've got its own nervous system. So you have the enteric nervous system, which, you know, communicates directly with the brain. That's why you see so many people with gut issues have depressive moods, anxiety, all this kind of stuff. You also have there's more nerve endings in your gut than there is in your spine. You have 75% of your immune system is either in or around your gut. You've got like over 100 different species of bacteria that we know of, and there's way more that we don't know of. And these have the ability to program you for obesity. They have the ability to decide whether something's a toxin to your body or not. Like, it's just an incredible system. And so the thing is with it is that because it's also the filter, so when food is in your digestive system, it's still technically outside of the body, because obviously we can't have pieces of cheesecake floating around our blood, right? That'd be a bit strange. So what happens, that's not how our chemistry works. So our body, our digestive system has to be able to filter that. And nowadays, unfortunately, many people have very suboptimal function of their digestive system. Yeah. So because it is such a powerful system, because it regulates immune system, nervous system, stress, all these kind of things, yes, we absolutely have to look at the gut. So we want to obviously optimize function, but at the same time, I suppose the difference with us is that we'll look at cell function at the same time. Yeah. So what happens with people is that they'll have an issue. And so what they do is they try and address a behavior first. So they'll change their diet. So if they have IBS, they might go and see a dietitian, and they'll put them on a low FODMAP diet, which is low fermentable foods. Yeah. And so they might get respite from it, but to stay on a low FODMAP diet forever is just not going to happen. No. It's just not possible. It's very restrictive. So what we want to do is we want to understand why they have the problem, not just play the game of subtraction, if that makes sense. Because when we play the game of subtraction, we end up on just a very limited amount of foods, generally quite a lot of supplements, and we end up on this merry-go-round of, I feel a bit better, but as soon as I make a change, symptoms start to come back again.
Yeah.
So quite an in-depth answer to your question, isn't it?
Very much. And, you know, I'm so glad that you did that, because obviously these days you see a lot, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of people pursuing the heal the gut. And to me, it's always, whilst for sure, most people have compromised gut function, and healing the gut is probably a good thing to do, but there is so much more than just the gut.
Yeah, for sure. Like, the way I describe it to people is that if there isn't any one system any more important than the other, so to speak. Like, if you didn't have your adrenals, you'd be dead within about 60 seconds, right? Right. So like, it's pretty damn important that we have adrenals as well. But the problem is the way that people go about it. So even in the functional medicine world, it's still in some ways is starting to become a bit more dogmatic, even though they say they're not dogmatic, like conventional medicine. But what you'll see in the functional medicine world is that now you'll get people who are gut specialists or thyroid specialists or adrenal specialists. And the problem with that is that, especially if you try and deal with adrenals or thyroid first, you're just wasting your time, in my opinion anyways, a humble opinion, but from my experience. And the reason I would say that is because the adrenals and the thyroid don't choose what to do. They're told what to do. Yeah. So if you're trying to control a system that can't choose what to do, you have to be able to control all the other inputs. And so, for instance, that's why many people go for the gut, because if you can control the gut, you can control inflammation signaling to a certain degree. You can deal with, you know, conversion, because 20% of your thyroid conversion to active hormone happens in the gut. You can do a lot. if that makes sense. That's why the gut got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
But sadly, if you just deal with one thing, you'll get people to get better. And I learned this over 10 years, right? I started with the gut. But what I kept finding is that you keep getting hiccups and you keep like getting these like little bumps in the road that don't make sense because you're eating well and you're exercising well and optimizing sleep. So really these symptoms shouldn't exist. And so when you start looking externally to it, you can start understanding where some other problems might exist. Like we just got testing back from someone who's an entrepreneur. He's massively into mindset. He helps men all around the world. And yet his capacity was just going down and down and down and down. And it didn't make sense to him because there's nothing. He earns great money. He's got as much freedom as anyone could ever want. And yet his physical body was just of allergy symptoms, a lot of runny nose, a lot of stuffiness. He kept getting colds, couldn't lose body fat. And we tested him and his body is just riddled with yeast, fungal, bacterial infections. And when we look at some of the underlying physiology, it was where he lived. Like his house was just riddled with all these issues.
Right.
And so we become the collective of our environment, right? We do that from a mindset point of view, right? So from a mindset point of view, if you're around negative people all the time, all of a sudden you're going to start lowering your bar because, you know, our biggest fears of humans are being rejected or being left behind. So in the end, you're going to give in and start engaging in the conversation, rather than trying to change it. And so what happens is the same with our health. Yeah. And so what happens is if you live in a house that's full of mold or damp or things like this, in the end, your body is going to adjust and try and have to deal with it. And it's just not a good thing.
So you have to move house effectively or get your house done.
He pretty much has just moved house. So yes, that was the answer.
That was the answer. I had a family member who suffered from something similar, so I might recommend that to them. They won't be happy, but there you go.
We did have a client who physically moved houses, sold one house and bought a new one purely because of how severe his health issues were because of damp and mold problems in the house.
Yeah, and pretty much his symptomology just didn't vanish straight away, but it probably reduced 80% by just moving.
It reminds me a lot of the Dave Brailsford marginal gains philosophy brought into British cycling, you know, where you just look at everything you're doing across the board. And if you just improve everything by as little as 1%, collectively, you make a massive, massive difference. And this obviously was borne out by all the medals that Team GB won across 2 or 3 Olympics in their cycling.
It's exactly the same, really. The thing for us is, I suppose if you think about it, it's a bit like the 80-20 principle, Pareto. Yeah. It's like not everything is weighed with the same importance, if that makes sense. So like I'll give you an example, the new client that's just joined us today, for where he is right now, I know he needs what I have, but he isn't at the point of readiness to take it on board. So the best person for him now is Marta.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So there's the belief of we know what they need, but at the time, to help someone progress the most, you have to find that middle ground of where they can find acceptance. And I think that's probably one of the trickiest things in coaching, is to honor someone's space, but do it gently with them.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, you know, that's all about serving the client at the highest level, isn't it?
Absolutely. The highest level is just, again, very, very relative to the person.
Of course, yes.
And that's one of the most powerful things that we could have ever learned as mentors and coaches, is to appreciate your own journey and how fast or quick or how big the steps you're taking might seem to you. And it's powerful to relate that to a client, but at the same time, they will have a very different perspective based on their circumstances, based on their physical experiences. Yeah. And we get to honor and appreciate that as a coach, because something that might frustrate us as a coach or a mentor, sometimes thinking, why are they not doing this? If they just do this, is going to be so much better. But we can't do that, right? Is appreciating the fact that they might not be in the space at the time to do it, but they will do something completely different that will turn several aspects of their life around even quicker. And then you realize, okay, that's how we've gone over the, over 10 years now that we've been doing this, for realizing and understanding that your personal journey is super important, because clients can relate to that, because they can see themselves in you, but at the same time, it's also honoring their space and the personal circumstances that they're in. And I feel that's what makes a great coach or a mentor as well, where they can relay their story to someone else, their experience as well, but at the same time relate to the client's personal circumstances and be able to be that guiding light. We always describe it as the lighthouse, shining the light on the harbor, and then the client chooses how they get to the harbor. Absolutely. With your guidance. And it's just such an incredibly powerful experience when you see how people truly empower themselves rather than just following your process. They actually figuring out their own way with your guidance. And that's probably the most amazing thing you can experience.
And I guess that, well, I don't guess, I would put my hand on my heart and say that's the absolute reason why you have clients that you've helped years ago still getting results today, are still living their best life. Because if you allow clients to find their own way, you're guiding them along the way, but you're allowing them to uncover the knowledge and information and implementing it in their own lives themselves, they're so much more likely to carry on after you've left their lives.
Definitely. And there's, I don't remember it word for word, but there is a beautiful quote in a book that I read a few months ago that talks about the fact that anything we say and impose on a client that they don't experience themselves will eventually hurt them.
Right.
So it's allowing to ourselves to share the words that we have to share as a coach or a mentor, but then also being able to guide a client through their own personal experience of it so they can relate it to themselves in a very personal way. Because if they just hear your words and see you preaching to them and saying, do this, this is the result you're going to have, and they just do it without the personal experience of the challenges in between, the outcomes of the actions they've taken to overcome those challenges, those words will eventually just stand against them, because they will feel like a failure. They will feel they can't do what you tell them to do. They'll feel bad because they feel powerless in terms of not being able to follow your advice. And it just doesn't work that way. So remembering that words don't teach, words can share the information, the foundation that you then have to take on board and live through the personal experience of it. That's when you truly gain that wisdom of your life experience that allows you to years later still live your life, in a much better, much more expansive and amazing way to what it was like before you worked with someone. And realizing that was another massive shift for us in our own personal journey and working with clients as well, because it was like a confirmation of everything we've been doing, just said by someone somewhere that we read something, and it was just like, that's exactly what we do. It's just beautifully put in one sentence. That it was awesome. So knowing that it's okay for our clients to go through the experience they go through. It's okay for them to have challenges and roadblocks and speed bumps that they just go over too fast sometimes. And, they get to just shake it all off and realign and course correct. And that's the beauty of the path, because they're physically learning the experience of their own life. And when they do it that way, it resonates at such a deep level that it's almost immediately integrated, and they can then use it as something that's a feedback loop and a point of reference for the future experiences. Because that's how our mind works. We just filter everything constantly through our previous experiences that had a similar meaning, and can create new meanings through the work we do with our guys. They have a new reference point. And then every time something of a similar meaning happens, they've got a choice whether they relate it to the experience from the past that wasn't really serving them, or whether they actually use the new reference point and strengthen and empower themselves in using that new reference point to create that new behavior, new pattern, new way of approaching that.
And you've just shown beauty there, Marta, why it's so very, very important to integrate and reconnect all the aspects of mind, body, and spirit, because without that, you get none of that. So thank you for doing that. That was wonderful. I'm fascinated, guys. What's next for you? What you got bubbling under? Because I know you're always up to certain things.
Yeah, we are. It's true. Well, in the immediate, our biggest focus at the moment is what we call the A.R.A Method, which is kind of our way of distilling down the last 10 years of our work. So essentially it stands for awareness, responsibility. And what we really found was some of the key components of why people keep falling off the path, so to speak.
Right.
And I suppose you can't ever really fall off the path, you just fall onto another one.
Yep.
But the thing is that the one that they prefer. And so what you will know as well as us, Paul, is that people can't change until they have awareness of something, right? You can't change anything unless you've got awareness of something. Otherwise, it's truly a subconscious.
Well, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly. So once people have a level of awareness, the temptation is to take action. So is to jump from, let's say someone is like, I'm not happy with the content of my thoughts. I'm going to jump to insert self-development, buy a self-development book, go to a nutritionist, change my diet, if it's weight, whatever it might be. And so what they're essentially doing is changing a behavior. But what we know is that when you try and change a behavior, it has just a massive failure rate.
Yeah.
Because we haven't dealt with the underlying trigger or the unconscious reward system of why they were creating them actions previously. So the next part of it is what we do with people. We take from action to personal responsibility. So our part in this is asking them where they have co-created the experience they have right now. So like, for instance, if it's health issues, what has been going on in your life? Have you been overworking? Have you been eating like shit? Have you not been looking after yourself? Can you truly hand on heart say that you've been taking responsibility for being the best version of yourself? And that would be the same in mindset as well. Like it'd be a point of view of the responsibility around that is, have you been making yourself small to try and fit in with other people? Have you been, holding things back in fear of rejection? Or have you been sacrificing yourself in order to believe that, you'll be accepted somewhere else? And that can be a really tough conversation because no one really wants to admit that stuff, right? Because when you admit that stuff, it's real, it's a thing. And so then that gets scary because if you don't immediately know the action to take to get out of it, that can feel really overwhelming, right? So what our guidance is with people is we take them from awareness, we run them through responsibility, then into aligned action. So it's then about, like you said, the inches, the small things that we can do on a daily basis that can help these people to start seeing how they can connect to themselves in a different way. I suppose the easiest way to describe it is like how many people emotionally eat, right? And so if you think about it, the brain is very simple from a reward system. It either wants food or safety.
Yeah.
So when we're young, we learn to fulfill this pattern very simply. So the trigger is the hunger hormone that we have in our body. So then the behavior is go and eat food. The reward is you're satisfied.
Yeah.
Okay, you've eaten your food. What we have though is the amazing right-hand side of the brain, which gives us context-based memory. So when we get feelings of sadness or overwhelm or stress or things that feel uncomfortable, we have this recall pattern. So that's the trigger. And so then the behavior is triggered by your brain going, well, when you felt bad before, you ate this thing and felt better. So eat that thing. So the behavior is eat the thing. And so we very often, people always ask, why do I pick this thing? And people will very often pick refined sugars. Yeah. And the reason they pick it is because it spikes dopamine, which is the quickest way to change your state. So it's why every addictive drug on the planet is all manipulating the dopamine reward system. Yeah. So that's why certain things, other drugs, are not seen in addictions. So what we do is we then have the behavior of eating the food, and then the reward is we escape the feeling short term. But very often, long term, we start beating ourselves up more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there is entire emotional aspect to it. Spend the next few hours talking about why do we pick certain foods, for example, right? If we're talking about emotional eating and that reward system in terms of going for food, why do we pick one food over another? Why do we pick chocolate, or why do we pick sweets, like a different type of sweets, like candy or something like that? There will be emotions behind that will guide us into connections from our childhood, what it reminds us of the memories that we have attached to it, that we will choose a certain food over another. So the responsibility part is something, we're talking about one small aspect in terms of the reward system, in terms of going for food and emotional eating. But the responsibility part is very often the missing part and the missing step in any self-development work or health work that we want to do to improve our lives, because we go from literally, like Cliff was saying, the awareness, I know I want to change something, directly to action. I'm going to work with this coach, everything's going to be better. I'm going to go to this event, everything's going to be better. I'm going to read that book, everything's going to change. But we don't fully understand why we were doing those things in the first place. And when we guide our clients through that responsibility part, where they understand what choices they made, what stories are attached to it, what's going on physiologically, what emotions are attached to it, the action, you don't even have to necessarily think of action or plan. It just follows. They know immediately what the first step will be.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, when you can empower someone or allow them to empower themselves to the point where they know that if they become aware of something that they want to change, it's not necessarily going straight for action, but actually spend some time with yourself, asking a few important questions first, and then follow with action that's going to be in alignment to what it is that you actually want to get. Because if you think jumping directly from awareness to action to a course or a book or something like that is just following the reward system and hitting a dopamine reward system straight away, it's basically doing the same thing we were doing before, but it's just in a slightly different way that makes us feel better that we're doing something about our life.
Which is why you get so many people going to events time and time again that actually don't really change their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So,
and you really guys
are focused.
Sorry, I was just going to say you've remarkably covered what I call the art of coaching. I truly believe that coaching at a high level is very much an art form, and for sure, I think you guys have nailed that tremendously. So thank you very much for that. I'm mindful of the time. I'm mindful of the time you've given to me on the podcast and the information you give, which is absolutely superb. I'm just wondering, where's the best place for people to find out more about your methods?
The easiest way right now is just to go to cliffandmarta.com. They can see us there, or we have a free group on Facebook, the A.R.A Method. And it's just the A.R.A Method by Cliff and Marta. And they can find us there as well. It's generally the easiest places. Social media is a place that we're quite active.
And community is really important for us as well. So, you can go to a website and read stuff there, which is awesome because it's information that then can lead you to taking a different action as well. But at the same time, the community feel that we have in our Facebook group is something that's really close to our heart, and it's really important for us as well, where people can connect to other people, not just follow Cliff and Marta and the A.R.A Method, but also understand that there's so many other people wanting to do the same thing and connect with them. That's super important for us.
Yeah, and I also put a ton of deeper trainings in there as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that I'm a member. I'm in the A.R.A community as well, and I can confirm that Cliff and Marta really are active in there and really do put a ton of good information in there. So it's well worth you listening to this podcast, going along there and getting yourself in there and getting yourself involved, and talk to the people in there, talk to Cliff and Marta. They're always answer any questions. They're very active members on that. Cliff, Marta, I want to thank you so very much for joining me on the podcast. It's been an absolute blast, and the information you've given has been absolutely world class. So I want to thank you so very, very much for doing it for me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, pleasure, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'll catch up again with you very soon.